At 82, I finally realized my son only visits for money. Here's what I did. I was 82 when I finally allowed myself to see it. Not because it started at 82, because that's when I stopped making excuses. My son has always been charming. Even as a boy, he knew how to read a room. He could sense tension before anyone else. He could soften his tone, adjust his posture, say the right thing at exactly the right moment. I used to call it emotional intelligence. Now, I'm not so sure. After his mother passed, he began visiting more often. At first, it felt comforting. He brought groceries sometimes, fixed small things around the house, checked in about doctor's appointments. He called me old man with a half smile, the way sons do when they want to keep things light. I told myself I was lucky. Not every father gets that kind of attention at my age. But slowly, a pattern emerged. His visits coincided with certain conversations, questions about investments, subtle inquiries about the house, comments about making sure everything's organized for later. Later. That word has a way of shrinking a man. At 82, you become aware of how people look at you. Not cruelly, calculatingly. You are a timeline. You are an estate. You are a distribution event waiting to happen. I ignored the feeling at first. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, he was my son. I raised him, I sacrificed for him, I worked through layoffs and economic downturns to keep stability under his feet. I paid for college without complaint, helped with the down payment on his first home, covered unexpected medical bills when his second child was born. I never kept score, because fathers aren't supposed to. But I began noticing something unsettling. When I talked about my health, he leaned in. When I talked about my investments, he leaned closer. When I talked about selling a property, his tone sharpened. There's a difference between concern and anticipation. It's subtle, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. One afternoon, we were sitting in my living room. I mentioned casually that I was thinking about taking a trip, somewhere warm, somewhere I had always wanted to see but postponed because work was busy and life was crowded. He smiled. "That's great, Dad," he said. "Just make sure you're not dipping too much into long-term plans." Long-term plans. I looked at him carefully. "What long-term plans?" I asked. He laughed lightly. "You know, the estate. We just want to make sure things are preserved." We. That word echoed in my chest. We. As if my money had already shifted categories. As if my remaining years were a management phase. I didn't argue. I didn't confront him. But something inside me settled into clarity. He wasn't visiting for money. He was visiting for reassurance. Reassurance that the future he had quietly budgeted was still intact. The moment of confirmation came quietly, not with an accusation, not with a confession, with absence. There was a stretch of 3 weeks when I didn't call him. I didn't mention appointments. I didn't bring up investments. I didn't hint at paperwork. I simply lived. I took myself out to lunch. I met an old friend for coffee. I attended a local lecture. I even scheduled a financial review with my advisor without mentioning it to anyone. My son did not visit. He didn't call. He didn't text to check in. 3 weeks is not dramatic, but at 82, you feel weeks differently. Time is no longer abstract. When I finally called him, his voice was distracted. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" "Yes," I said. "Just seeing how you are." There was a pause. Then he asked, almost casually, Everything still on track with the estate stuff? There it was. Not, how are you feeling? Not, are you lonely? Not, do you need anything? The estate. I answered calmly, I'm reviewing things. His tone sharpened instantly. With who? My advisor. Another pause. You should probably loop me in, he said, just to make sure nothing changes unexpectedly. Unexpectedly, as if I were an unpredictable variable in his financial planning. That was the moment the last layer of denial fell away. It wasn't that he didn't care about me at all. It was that his care was intertwined with projection. Projection of future benefit. Projection of anticipated stability. Projection of inheritance already mentally allocated. And I had allowed it. Because part of me enjoyed being needed, even if the need was distorted. There is a strange loneliness in old age. When your usefulness fades, you cling to any form of relevance, even financial relevance, even the quiet knowledge that your existence anchors someone's expectations. But relevance built on money is fragile. It evaporates the moment the numbers change. That afternoon, I went through old photo albums, pictures of him as a boy, gap-toothed smile, mud on his knees, running toward me without hesitation. That child did not care about estates. That child cared about presence. Somewhere along the way, something shifted. Maybe in him, maybe in me. Perhaps I talked too casually about what will be yours someday. Perhaps I created the assumption that what I built was not for my security, but for his future. Generosity without boundaries breeds expectation. That's a truth I learned too late. The next time he visited, I decided not to test him. I decided to confront the truth directly. When he came over the following Sunday, I didn't offer coffee. I didn't ease into conversation. I didn't pretend everything was light. We sat across from each other at the dining table, and I spoke before he could steer us toward numbers. I need to ask you something, I said. He smiled cautiously. Sure, Dad. If I had no money left, would you still visit this often? The question landed harder than I expected. He blinked. Of course I would. I didn't nod. I didn't argue. I simply held his gaze long enough for silence to do its work. He shifted in his chair. That's not fair, he said. Why would you even ask that? Because I need to know, I replied. He began explaining himself, talking about responsibility, about making sure things are organized, about protecting family stability. The words sounded rehearsed, sensible, strategic. They did not sound emotional. And that's when I realized something that hurt more than his estate questions. He was thinking about my death more than my life. He was planning for distribution while I was still breathing. So I told him what I had done. I had amended the will, not to remove him entirely, not to punish him, but to restructure everything. A large portion would go to charities that mattered to me, some to his siblings, some to the grandchildren directly, and yes, something to him, but far less than he assumed. He stared at me. You're changing everything? I already did. His reaction was immediate. Anger. Not sadness, not confusion. Anger. You're letting emotions cloud judgment, he said. That's not smart. That sentence confirmed everything. My estate was not love in his eyes. It was strategy. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity without bitterness. "I am not a portfolio," I said quietly. "I am your father." Silence filled the room. He looked at me differently then, not with calculation, with discomfort. And maybe, just maybe, with recognition. "I didn't mean for it to feel that way," he admitted eventually. "But it did." That's the part people avoid. Intent does not erase impact. We did not reconcile dramatically that day. There were no tears, no immediate transformation. But something shifted. He began visiting less frequently for a while, then, slowly, more consistently again. This time the conversations changed. He asked about my day, about books I was reading, about memories from his childhood. The estate was no longer the opening topic, it was absent. And I realized something important. Sometimes the only way to untangle love from money is to remove money from the equation. At 82, I finally saw what I had refused to see. My son's visits were not entirely about me. They were about reassurance, about projection, about a future he thought was secured. By changing the will, I did something radical. I made my presence matter more than my absence. I reminded him, and myself, that I am still alive, still sovereign, still more than a pending inheritance. And if one day he visits because he wants to hear my voice rather than protect his future, then this painful clarity will have been worth it.